right. Randy, thank you so much for jumping on. Lots of juicy topics to talk about.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm always excited to share my opinions and just kind of talk trash on this crazy world we're living in right now.
Yeah, so I think that you got on my radar through your words, not mine, but your shit talking on LinkedIn.
Mm.
Well, I guess something along those lines. You're very
Yeah,
active on LinkedIn, and I love what you have to say on there. But tell us about yourself. Who are you? Your involvement with NITO? Why do you care about all this stuff? Like, what's your day job? Let me hear the whole
yeah,
spiel. Yeah.
totally. So I'm going to start with just the shit talking, then I'll go backwards for who I am. So, I've been in the business a long time, which I'll explain, but I've found that LinkedIn is just a great way to share opinions about the industry and discuss in a professional fashion just interesting aspects of our world. And it's opened me up to get to know a lot of people, where on other social platforms, it pretty quickly devolves to, personal attacks and everything else. Where on LinkedIn, I feel like people are way more open to be challenged and questioned and enjoy the deeper, like, digging on an issue. So, an issue that I've been passionate about is ticketing. And there's so many opinions, there's so many potential solutions and problems that it's a great avenue to have really intelligent conversations where I've gotten to know people like you and I've gotten to know kind of the stakeholders in every major ticketing company, it seems, from the CEOs downward. And I've learned a ton. And it's given me a platform to fight for things that are important to myself, for both fans and artists. And, most recently, it's brought me to meetings with the Department of Justice and the FTC, top senators' offices. Just, it's given me an ability to reach so many people to fight for what's important. So I know you asked me about myself, but I just
Yeah.
kind of wanted to
No,
give that.
it's a great place to start, and we're gonna get into all those topics later, and it's literally why we're talking. But yeah, you're also highly involved in just like kind of the day-to-day music industry, and you and I were talking about this, like, as the CEO of Prism, I could just duck my head into like code all day long. But like as I've been in the industry longer and longer, I've realized it's like very important to understand what's happening on the industry and like what's the top, most interesting conversations, and why it's important to both, like, do your day job really well, but also understand like what's impacting the greater industry. And that was a beautiful part of the conversation that we had when we agreed to do the pod. So I'm glad you touched on that first, but why don't we, yeah, what is your day job, and what's your involvement in NITO? Let's bring it back down to earth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So taking a step back, I started my career as an agent and did that for a handful of years, transitioned to working for
Where
some
were you?
music. I was at a company called Artist and Audience, where they're no longer around, but they were a really cool boutique agency in the mid 90s, where I at one time was the assistant for Ken from English, Sam Kirby, and Tim Bohr all at once, who are all, very successful agents on their own now, but they had all just recently become agents. And, I was sitting in an office entering offers into a computer until 9 p.m. at night every night, where these things were, handwritten offers before we had great systems like Prism, where, like, literally, we had one email address for the office. It was just another era, but I got to
Love it.
learn the booking world from the ground up from doing that. And I went from intern to agent in probably like a little more than 12 months. So it was kind of a really interesting time. Funny little side note that I know some listeners will appreciate is I'd done a few internships in the music industry and was like, I really need to learn a booking agency. I haven't done this yet. So this is, again, pre-internet. So I opened up the Polestar Guide to Booking Agencies and I looked through artist rosters of all these companies. And my goal was to target agencies that had great bands that I thought were going to break and they were going to need to staff up the companies. And my plan literally worked flawlessly. And Artist and Audience was booking at the time bands like Live, Tricky, Nine Inch Nails, Marilyn Manson, like so many things that were just blowing up in that mid 90s
Whoa,
era. And like
awesome.
the moment school ended, I immediately rolled into a job. And, it was a job that they created because they needed to scale up and grow their team. So just, you know, little tool of the trade of just finding unique ways to get yourself a job is always, I always find those stories interesting from other people.
Oh yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah. So started there as an agent, and a company blew up, did incredibly well. Guy named Alex Cochin was an amazing agent who started the company, but he was not great at running a company, but he was a great agent. And as fast as the company kind of grew, it collapsed, unfortunately, equally as fast. And then I kind of moved on to a few
Mm.
other roles in the industry, but it really gave me my knowledge of the live touring industry in a really strong fashion, just being a part of an agency for 3 or 4 years.
Got it, got it. And then, and where does that, leave you in like, how many years ago was that, and what have you been up to since then?
Yeah, so that was, I've been doing this a long time. That was like the late 90s. And I went from there to work for a record label for a minute doing tour marketing, which was a logical kind of transition
Yeah.
from booking. I really just, you know, interestingly, I kind of was shying away from booking because at that point in time, a company named SFX, which has now become Live Nation,
Mhm.
was out buying up all the promoters. And my fear was is you were going to need less agents because you were going to have these, this huge company that controlled the industry, and, they might just go straight to managers. They might not need agents anymore.
Mm.
And decided as I was still at the very bottom that, as there could be consolidation, that might be a good time to pivot and try something new. And, I was dead wrong on that. We're not all right on everything, but I was right that, that company would become Live Nation and become a behemoth. And, they did kind of carve off, you don't have agents for the top acts, quite often anymore, but the middle I
Yeah.
would have been just fine and continue working in. So like I was a little off in my theories, but not terribly. And after that, I went and worked for Wind Up Records, tour marketing, worked on everything but the band Creed there. I kind of went in there as Creed was blowing up, and spent a couple of years there. And then I left that, just really wasn't happy with the role there, just wasn't what I loved doing. And I ended up in the late 90s working for a music tech startup called Music Vision, and we were building an ad network for music websites,
Mhm.
and we were probably like 20 years too early. Like, great idea. I was employee number 13. Company scaled up to about 550 people. We had an amazing run, but in the dot-com bust of, what was it, 2000,
Oh, yeah.
2001, whatever that was, the company did not make it through that stock market crash.
Yeah.
But the company was run by someone that you may know, Matt. Well, I know some of the listeners definitely will. A guy named Mark Weiss, who went on to start Artist Arena and
Mhm.
now has a ticketing VIP company called 24/7. So, we've stayed in touch with the guy who ran the company and worked with him on various projects over the years since then. But yeah, from that point, after I worked at the internet startup, I came back to the music industry and worked for a London Sire Records for a split second. Then Warner more or less shut down that label. And then 9/11 hit, and I could not find a job. It was
Mm.
impossible to look for work in New York. It was just a very weird, unique time here. And kind of was forced into starting a management company with a friend because I saw no other option, and have been a manager ever since. But I literally did not necessarily want to become a manager, wasn't looking to be one, but just had people tell me to be a manager, and the opportunity appeared. And 20 something years later, I'm still managing.
Wow, awesome. Love that. And when did you get involved with NITO?
So I got involved with NITO during the COVID pandemic. I kind of very quickly realized, obviously, that we had major problems to our industry like everyone else did, but spent time trying to find solutions too. And there was two things that I was very active in. One was learning about every government program available to help support people during COVID. So I ended up on a lot of calls with other managers and agents, talking to them how to apply for different programs that were available. And also at the same time was working to build a business for live streaming for my artists. And through both those areas, I got to know the team at NITO, and NITO was working hand in hand with NIVA. And to take a step back, NITO is the National Independent Talent Organization, and it's a group of managers and agents that are fighting for issues important to artists, agents, and managers. And NIVA is the National Independent Venue Association, who's doing the same thing for venues. So NIVA was working really hard on the Save Our Stages Act. We came in and helped support them, brought the voices of agents, managers, and artists behind them. That also helped to open the door to get all those teams involved in getting help from the government during the COVID pandemic. So through that, I ended up getting to know a lot of people within NITO and, just agents, managers, people I maybe talked to from time to time. But now we were all working together to fight for our own survival. And through that, I was able to get involved in a lot of the lobbying for the Save Our Stages Act, as well as educating them on the live streaming business that I had built for my artist. And just, I really love this camaraderie of, managers and agents typically are very siloed. They don't interact with other people. They're not known for being supportive of each other. So it's really, the guys, Frank Riley and Wayne and a handful of the other team that started NITO, they really kind of flipped the script on how agents and managers looked at themselves and became this collaborative entity. And, as COVID ended, they could have just kind of went away and said, we saved our asses, we're done. But instead, they said, what are other issues that are important that we should be fighting for? And let's use this collective brain power and relationships to do more. And the area that I've been passionate about is fighting ticket scalping and changing the laws to protect both the fans and the artists of these predators out there.
Yeah. Maybe a simple question, but why are you passionate about that?
At the end of the day, my role as a manager is to protect the artist. And I think through protecting the artist, it's also important, the artist wants to protect their fans. There's a lot of people who look at the fan as just a cash machine to take money from, but you need that fan. Without the fan, you have nothing. So if that fan
Kind
is
of a
being
self-evident
exploited,
statement, but not
yeah,
perhaps not so obvious, unfortunately.
yeah, no, exactly. And if you ask the scalpers, like I'm in regular wars on Twitter with a handful of scalpers or their buddies like Ticket Helper 111 or whatever the hell the guy's name is. The guy's got 10,000 followers on Twitter and attacks me all the time because I point out that he's just ripping off artists and fans. He says, you don't give a shit about the fans. You just want to make as much money as you can off of them. And in reality, if the fans overpay for shows, they have less money to buy merch. They have less money to buy drinks at the bar. They have less money to go out to dinner in the neighborhood before the show. They may still come, but this money that was being spread throughout that ecosystem that supports live events, the majority of the money could be just leaving the ecosystem and going to these predators who are sucking it out for their own profits and not reinvesting any of it into the live event. So that's what really drove me to become incredibly passionate about this, because if someone's, it's kind of right and wrong. Somebody's walking in the room and stealing, and there's some people who, they see something wrong, they turn the head their other way. I fight, like
I
I've
love
gotten to the
that.
point where I've had some friends ask me, like, are you working on this ticketing thing full time now? And I'm like, no, I'm a full time manager. This ticketing thing is just a mental illness.
Oh my God. No, I mean, you're passionate about helping, and I love that. And the fact that it's not a full-time job, I think makes you so dangerous, because you're just doing
Yeah,
it because you believe it's right. And
exactly.
it is right.
Yeah, it is right. And there's a lot of people who care who don't know how to fight. And through my work with NITO on this Save Our Stages Act a couple of years back, I've learned now it's not as hard as you think to get to some of these politicians.
Yeah.
A lot of them do actually care. And even if they don't care, they care about finding issues to give them wins. So either way, it works to our advantage.
So okay, beautiful intro. I totally get the arc of your career, getting interested into all of this, shit talking on LinkedIn, shit talking with the politicians in Washington. But like, let's kind of wipe the etch a sketch clean here and go a different direction. Okay, so but it's related. My ADD is kicking in. Um, Taylor Swift concert happens. Paraphrasing here, for the first time ever, perhaps everyone from local senators, congresswomen, all the way up to the president is paying attention to this industry, and all the political reporters, and it's like, oh my god, something might happen. Like, I don't think there has ever been a moment where Washington cared as much as what was happening in that moment, and Taylor was perhaps the straw that broke the camel's back, but there's a whole psychological discussion about why that was the event that was kind of the shot heard around the world. But there was some interesting things happening with the Biden administration. Um, what's the arc of what happened, what didn't happen? Trump came in. There was news a couple weeks ago. Um, Neva kind of famously put out a post, and it was fascinating from two angles. Number one was their wording frustrated some of the community. Um, and but secondly, it was all like, looking past that, it was like, wait, what the, like, Trump's actually doing something in this like space? Like, a lot of people assume that the Trump administration was going to have a lighter DOJ on businesses, and let's not be in the game here of saying, I'm not cheering for Trump, or neither one of us are getting on our side. Let's just be objective and talk about the facts. Like, yeah, so give me the arc from Taylor Swift, Biden, to where we're at right now. And there's a lot of fog right now. Like, are things moving? I've heard rumors of people getting deposed, and like, that the DOJ is actively trying to break up Live Nation and Ticketmaster. Let's dive in.
Yeah, so that's like an hour-long conversation, but thankfully we've got the time right now. But kind of starting back from the beginning, and I'll go back before Taylor Swift, although Taylor Swift is, definitely the straw that broke the camel's back. But since the time of Pearl Jam fighting Ticketmaster in the 90s through to Taylor Swift, you had a couple of big moments over time where there were big uproars against Ticketmaster. And every one of these times, the scalpers brilliantly played these moments to their advantage. And they hired the top consumer rights lobbyists to fight on their behalf, to argue that a ticket is personal property rather than a license to see an event. And most importantly, they went in to meet with these government agencies and say, Ticketmaster's a problem. We all agree. We are the fan rights organization of whatever name they had in the moment, and we're here to fix the problem. And in reality, what they did every time they came in the room to say they were fixing the problem was yet another moment where they were making the problem even worse. And they were helping to write laws that did things like blocking transferability, or blocking an artist from blocking transferability of tickets, or saying that you can sell an unlimited amount of resale tickets. Like, there's just countless laws that they fought for, that all this did was give the scalpers more rights. And they convinced the government that the more rights that the scalpers have, the more damage it will do to Ticketmaster. And, even to this day, even where the government's understanding this issue a lot better, in almost every conversation you have with a politician on either the left or the right, first thing they ask you when you present the solution is, and how will this harm Ticketmaster? And, just want to take a step back also and say, I'm not a shill for Ticketmaster. I was a witness in the Justice Department inquiry around the Live Nation Ticketmaster merger. I was a witness on behalf of, why am I forgetting their name? Songkick against Ticketmaster, a handful of years ago. So I'm not out here to protect Ticketmaster. I'm just out here to kind of lay the facts out. So, taking a step back again to this consumer rights groups fighting on behalf of the scalpers, consumer rights groups, for the most part, are aligned with Democrats. So the Democrats, who typically fight for things that you would think to protect fans and be more, fan friendly and less corporation friendly, were fooled into helping these large corporations that are siphoning billions of dollars out of the live entertainment industry. And, to be clear, these ticket scalpers are not Matt and Randy on a street corner. These are private equity backed multi-billion dollar corporations. And it is big business. And this big business tricked the Democratic Party for many years into believing that they were the common man or woman on the street corner, just trying to unload their tickets to the show that they couldn't go to. So, fast forwarding to the Taylor Swift moment now, obviously it explodes. Congress is looking at this again. And, Ticketmaster, as always, was attacked. But for the first time that I've seen, Ticketmaster actually fought back and defended themselves. And that has helped to change the narrative. And part of the reasons that Ticketmaster previously did not defend themselves, you look at an issue like ticketing fees on tickets. A lot of people don't understand that a ticketing fee is not going in Ticketmaster's pocket. It's going in the pocket of the venue and or promoter, and in some limited situations, even the artist's pocket. So, there's these fees that are created. Everybody's fighting these fees, but they don't even know where the fees are coming from and where they're going. But I'm going to pause for a second.
No, fascinating. I want to encourage you to keep going. A couple of thoughts as you were saying this is, every time I have this conversation, I'm reminded that it's such a nuanced conversation, and you can't, just as much as you are tempted to demonize one person or one situation, like there's just a lot to unpack. And, for instance, if you look at scalping, like there's a portion of scalping that is just a genuine service to the customers. Like, I don't know, some wealthy couple really likes the idea that they can text their friend Joe and Joe gets them tickets. Like, that's fairly innocent, right? And then there's, hey, I'm sick and I can't go to a show. I want an ethical way to transfer my ticket to my friend or to sell it back to the market. Like these can oftentimes be cover, if you will, for a very nefarious version of all of that, which is the bots grabbing tickets, junk, selling tickets that aren't even on sale yet, and you put your credit card down as a consumer and you don't even realize that you didn't buy a ticket. Like they're going to go and then attempt to buy a ticket. But anyway, and then there's the battle between Ticketmaster and the scalpers, and Ticketmaster is seen as, this corporation that's a part of Live Nation. I'm not going to say I do this, but plenty of the industry like imbue them with, evil traits and see them as the big bad wolf in the room. And the scalpers kind of play off of that, but at the same time are, getting regulations passed. They're using Ticketmaster as the big bad wolf story to get perhaps even more nefarious practices put in place. But then then you got to peel the onion back a little bit further. And, Ticketmaster is now involved in scalping and is one of the biggest scalpers and resellers in the world. So it's a complex kind of back and forth. Nuanced. It's a battle. It's a true battle,
And Ticketmaster, I believe, is the number 3 biggest resale platform of tickets.
It's the third. Okay. StubHub, and then what?
I believe StubHub, SeatGeek, and that may even be the 4th, but you have StubHub, SeatGeek, Vivid Seats, and Ticketmaster
Okay,
are the
got
big
it.
dogs. And then, there's a privately owned company called Ticket Network who has built a lot of the infrastructure for these things and is also a reseller. They're a big player as well. But, one of the differences between Ticketmaster's marketplace and all these others is Ticketmaster is selling actual tickets in their resale marketplace. One of the things, and I just spoke to David Marcus from Ticketmaster last week, who confirmed this for me. In order to put a ticket on sale on Ticketmaster's resale platform, you have to have an actual barcode and an actual seat number. On a platform like StubHub, SeatGeek, Vivid Seats, Viagogo, etc.,
Spec tickets.
it's spec tickets, and spec
So
tickets.
Ticketmaster does not have spec tickets.
Correct. They do not have spec tickets. All the other platforms have a policy against spec tickets, but they don't have an infrastructure to block it. And it's a real easy infrastructure to block it. You have to have a ticket to sell a ticket, not rocket science. So, they all are spending a lot of money saying that they're against spec tickets and they want to ban spec tickets. And that's where this all gets so interesting. They say, absolutely, it's against our privacy policy and we're against it. So you should make a law banning this. But don't make a law that says that, we need to verify the ticket because that's an onerous request. So, there's just so much bullshit going on with this. And one thing for people to understand about spec ticks, they are ultimately unregulated equities that are traded.
Mhm.
They are so not just like, oh, the tickets go on sale Monday and on Saturday I'm going to sell a ticket. These people are putting tickets up on sale using highly intelligent data platforms to analyze the exact best date to buy a ticket. Typically, tickets at the on sale are very highly priced on the secondary market. Actually, before the on sale, they're the highest price because they have an exclusive on the tickets before they're available on the legitimate primary platforms. Then you have the on sale, the price typically drops. Quite often on a show, it just continues to drop. Sometimes the price picks up again a little bit before day of show, the 3 or 4 days before the show. There's some demand again, especially on a sold out show, and that price can lift again. But they're using these, intelligent platforms using AI and machine learning to pinpoint the exact moment to buy the ticket versus when they sell the ticket so that they could get it at the cheapest possible price. Because you have, guys like Matt and I who can't go to the show, throw our ticket up at face value or a little bit more to, just unload our ticket. And they have tools that are built to scrape these secondary platforms and alert them and buy the ticket the second we put a fairly priced ticket on the secondary. And then they will pick up that ticket and resell it at a huge profit.
Right. I'm just trying. Okay. A very, and again, it is a beast of a conversation, but all right, let's peel it back to the arc. So good context. It didn't start at Taylor Swift. But yeah, what was happening? And let's go. Was anything actually moving in the Biden administration? And what just happened a couple of weeks ago, where Kid Rock and Trump, collaborated and resparked the conversation. Let's go right to there. Yeah.
So the Biden administration was, there were two things. There's the Justice Department case, which is one thing. And then the other thing is Biden was really big on fighting fees and getting rid of junk fees. And
that's a good distinction. And those are two separate things. So the DOJ case was specifically re-litigating Live Nation and Ticketmaster's acquisition. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
And then the junk fee ban, or whatever you want to call it, is, in my opinion, just nonsense because, and, this is just me speaking, to be clear, NITO has a different stance than myself on some of these things. But ultimately, the junk fee ban, great intent. You're buying a $50 ticket. By the time you get to checkout, it's $75. So the way
if
Biden,
you're lucky.
I think, yeah, if you're lucky, seriously. The way Biden, I think, truly believed it, but certainly the way it was presented is we're going to get rid of the fee and you're just going to get your $50 ticket. But in reality, it's now you're going to see that your $75 ticket is $75 from the second you step in to buy a ticket, which I
Mhm.
agree with. Like, you should
Mhm.
know what you're buying and what the price is. But it didn't really change anything. And, the big fights, and this is where, like, I just sort of laugh at all this. Like, when you talk to, the agents within NITO and the managers, they say, we need to break out exactly what each of these fees are. And every fee needs to be itemized for the fan. And in my personal opinion, the fan is just pissed off that the ticket said 50 and now it's 75. They don't care that it went to the restoration fee
Totally.
and to the promoter and the convenience fee and whatever other fee. They're just saying, fuck you and your fees. So my feeling is we don't need to break out fees, but a lot of people don't agree with me on that.
Yeah.
And you could go a step deeper, and we could eliminate fees if artists agreed to make less money in the gross on shows. Then we wouldn't necessarily need fees at all on tickets, because fees were created as over the past 30 years, artists slowly started making a
Right.
larger and larger
Right.
percentage of the gross, and the promoters needed to be able to afford paying these larger percentage guarantees, and they created the fees to fight back at us demanding more money for our artists. And I'm pro making my artists as much money as possible, but at some point it
Something's got to
becomes just the
give.
shell
Yeah.
game where the
Yeah.
fan gets fucked.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and I was talking to Wayne and to oh my god, I'm blanking. President of NITO.
Wayne's the president, or Nathaniel's the
Nathaniel. I was
director.
talking
Yeah.
to Wayne. Yeah. Sorry.
So,
Didn't need my third cup of coffee today. But I was talking to Wayne and Nathaniel about this, and it is a really frustrating conversation to try and peel. I mean, we had a great conversation, but it's just an inherently frustrating predicament that over the course of 30 years, you had dare I call it dishonest communication, where one party agrees to a higher artist pay, and then it's like, okay, but they're not really agreeing it. They're slipping the fee in, and then the artist gets a sense of that, asks for more of it, and then the fees just keep hiding. And after 30 years of doing that, the deals are just so messed up, and it is contributing to this thing, which is like now made its all the way up into the executive branch of the government, and people are like, it's obviously breaking in a really epic way, and it's interesting because it gets grouped into this whole scalping conversation, and these are different things,
yeah, they're completely different issues.
yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
when I sat
And
down,
Live Nation is DOJ. It's like, even you saying that, it's like, yeah, we got to break these things apart. Like, it's fascinating, man. It really is. There's a lot going on here in this vat. Yeah.
yeah. And when you talk about the DOJ investigating Live Nation Ticketmaster, like, I sat down 2 weeks ago at a big round conference table at the DOJ with ticket scalper lobbyists, our lobbyists on our side protecting artists, and then, Marsha Blackburn's office, Mike Lee's office, Cory Booker's office, representatives from the FTC, and we're all sitting around the table talking about this issue. And, one of the really important things that I wanted to strongly flag in this meeting is, I'm not an expert on monopolies. Whether you break up Live Nation or Ticketmaster, not my problem. Don't care. Do whatever the hell you want to do. But once you decide that, you have to understand that that issue has nothing to do with the high ticket prices on the secondary market and the prices that fans are being ripped off for. So they cannot be confused by these scalpers blaming Live Nation Ticketmaster for the scalpers' behavior. And, I was very clear pointing out how these scalpers work, what their goals are, why they're operating the way they are, and that, at the end of the day, ticket prices are set by the promoter and the artist. Secondary market ticket prices are set by scalpers and their algorithms. And that has nothing to do with whether you have Live Nation broken into 50 companies or it's one company. The same problem's going to happen. And that we need two completely different solutions.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super interesting. Okay. So what happened a few weeks ago with this administration?
Yeah. So taking a step back, right, I think it was either before Trump was inaugurated or right around the time he was, Kid Rock had, tweeted or said a few things where he's like, now that my buddy Trump's in office, I'm going to work with him to take down the scalpers. And he, I guess, has a very close relationship with Trump. And he explained the issue as he sees it, which, I don't say this often, but Kid Rock and I agree for the most part on what the problems were. And he had, gave Trump all the details. Kid Rock worked very closely with Assistant Attorney General Gail Slater on what the problems were. And then Trump's team drafted this executive order that went to go after scalpers and asked the FTC, the DOJ, and the Treasury Department to, within 6 months, present a report back to him on what they believe the solutions are to fix this problem. So, one important thing to understand is
So
this executive
he
order,
involved all those.
all three of those organizations, and it comes down to the FTC is unfair civil business practices. The DOJ is criminal and antitrust practices. And Treasury are these people actually paying taxes on these transactions?
Wow.
And are they
Triple
reporting
whammy.
their revenue correctly? Where is the money coming from that's investing into buying these tickets? Are they coming from legitimate sources or illegitimate sources? So his executive order covers some wide areas, but what it doesn't do is create any rule that anyone has to do anything or that anything changes. I had a call with the FTC last Monday and was trying to understand what the executive order does and how I could help present them more information on how the scalpers operate so that they could go after them. And what the FTC explained to me was very clear that the law is the law. The executive order is just a letter from the president. And they are held to the laws within the Bots Act that was passed under Obama's administration. And if somebody uses a bot to buy more tickets than the strict ticket limit on tickets, and they can be found to have been broken the rules and use that bot, then they can be prosecuted. But it's pretty much almost impossible to pinpoint that. And I asked them questions like,
It's such a
so
fast
let's
moving
say,
industry too.
yeah,
It's like the next show is already being planned and
yeah. Well, check this out. This will blow your mind. So I said to them, so say Matt Ford is selling 8 tickets to a show, and we know there was a 4-ticket limit. Can we go after him for breaking the Bots Act? Because clearly he used some sort of nefarious practices to acquire more tickets than you're legally allowed. Unless you can show how you use the bot and proof that you use the bot, then it doesn't matter that you have 8 tickets and broke the ticket limit. So it's nearly impossible. And it's one of these things where both the scalpers and the government blame Ticketmaster because they say Ticketmaster should just tell us when a bot was used to get the ticket. But the problem is a bot is not what most of us think of as a bot. So it's very difficult to figure out. These bots are, first of all, they're using IP spoofing to appear like they're much closer to the venue than they really are, because Ticketmaster wants to sell to real fans that have IP addresses near the venue. Then they use these browser plugins that also have the IP spoofing in them. And these browser plugins allow them to dynamically create a credit card number on the spot so that each ticket that they acquire has a different credit card number, because that is part of how Ticketmaster decides whether if you're breaking the ticket limit, if it's the same address, same IP address, or IP address, and credit card number. If those are the same, then clearly you're trying to exceed the ticket limit. So you have a browser plugin that anonymizes all this information, creates a fake address that checks out with the fake credit card number, and then it's very difficult for any ticket system to know that somebody's using a browser plugin to create these things. So it becomes nearly impossible to stop these people.
fascinating, interesting.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so that was the FTC's response to you is you have to follow the law. So then is that like what's and now you're making the point that the law is near
The law is
almost
not
useless.
enforceable.
Yeah.
Yeah, the law is
So what
pretty
are they?
much
So
unenforceable.
what are they doing now then?
So there is a bill in Congress that is working its way through right now called the Ticket Act, which is better than the Bots Act, but not as good as what we should have out there. And currently, NITO and NEVA are not in support of this bill.
Mm.
And this is where, again, the nuances get ridiculous.
Yeah.
Is the scalpers love the bill. They think it's great. Ticketmaster is supporting the bill, but says they don't love it, but it's a compromise. And I think Ticketmaster, they're under investigation by the Justice Department. They just want all these ticketing things to go away.
Yeah.
So like, hey, let's just have a law. And it's better for
So
fans, but it's
why
not
is
as
Neva
good as
and
it could be.
Nito? Yeah. Why? What's the crux breaking point of the law that they're not supportive of this?
So there's a few things. One is, there's a speculative ticketing ban in this bill. But then there's a carve out that says any of these scalper platforms can create a club that you can join, a ticket buying club. So they've literally eliminated spec tickets and then are saying that you can have StubHub Plus, which is basically a speculative ticketing service that you pay $1 a year to be a member of, and that's totally legal. So they've done what the scalpers have always done and written a law that seems like it's helping that doesn't do a goddamn thing.
Interesting. So when you pay $1 a year for StubHub and then you can get access to these spec tickets.
Yeah, that's basically,
Just
and I don't know whether it'll be $1 a year, $5.99 a
but
year,
just to play devil's
built into the
advocate,
ticket price.
yeah.
Who knows?
To play devil's advocate, if the consumer is aware that they're purchasing a spec ticket, does that right the wrong? Is it like what's the real problem with the spec ticket? Is it my understanding that it was a lack of awareness? So could you are they trying to say that like am I right about that? And if I'm right about that, are they trying to say that hey, like if they're consciously joining a program and they know what they're getting into, and they still want to go through us anyway, then we're no different than the guy, than the whole manual process of calling Larry down the street, your ticket guy or
It,
whatever. Yeah,
it all depends on the presentation.
yeah,
So currently, StubHub says that spec ticks are banned on their platform, but they're everywhere.
yeah.
So if you're
Fascinating.
part of StubHub Plus and buried in the terms and service is
Yeah,
that StubHub Plus doesn't guarantee that it's a real ticket, that's a problem. If
yeah,
StubHub
yeah.
Plus is the buying service that states that, you're paying a fee now for a ticket that will be, delivered later, that's fine. But it's about transparency and fairness to the fan.
So I get the FTC's involvement. And back to our whole point that these are different topics. Live Nation, does Live Nation and Ticketmaster have a monopoly versus, is there a problem with scalping and promoter and agency deals? But why is the DOJ? Because the DOJ is again investigating the monopoly between accusation between Live Nation and Ticketmaster with this most recent, you know, um, Trump decree or whatever you want to call it. Is that right? And why are these getting lassoed together?
Yeah, so to be clear, the Trump executive order has nothing to do with the Justice Department investigation. The Justice Department investigation was launched by Jonathan Cantor in the Biden administration
Okay.
and 30 something state attorney generals. And the new assistant attorney general in charge of antitrust, Gail Slater, she is continuing working on the case that was started by the previous administration and is working towards investigating whether or not Ticketmaster is indeed a monopoly or Ticketmaster Live Nation is a monopoly. So that's one thing. The executive order is completely different. That's Trump more recently saying we want to go after these scalpers. It's not really commenting one way or another on the Live Nation Ticketmaster issue.
Okay. Interesting. So what is the DOJ doing in the situation?
So the DOJ, there's two things they're doing. One, they're continuing the investigation that started under the Biden
Yep.
administration.
Yeah. Put
And
that to the
then on
side.
the,
Yeah.
putting that to the side, on the executive order side, they're getting together with the stakeholders in the industry to understand what is the problem, how can the problem be fixed, and who are the bad players, what tools the bad players are using. And, like when I sat in that meeting, one of the things I walked them through is, things like the Insomniac browser plugin, what I was kind of explaining to you a little bit before.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is a company that is based in the US. The only thing that this browser plugin does is allow people to acquire tickets faster than a human can do and exceed ticket limits. So the way the law is written today, that's legal. But how can they influence that the law is altered, or can they prosecute anyway? Because they can go after these companies. Like, they could subpoena a company potentially. And again, I'm not a law expert, but my theory would be like they could probably go to Insomniac web browser and say, your customers are criminals. Your
Okay.
product is not necessarily criminal, but your customers are. Subpoena them for their customer records and then investigate to find where the crimes happened. So that's my hope of what the DOJ can do in this.
So let me connect the dots a little bit. Let's talk about the Live Nation Ticketmaster allegation. I understand now that this the DOJ is looking at something completely different now. They're looking at scalping, the issues with scalping. Ticketmaster, being the biggest ticketing company in the world, the third biggest scalping platform in the world, as you mentioned, is also involved with that. So now Live Nation / Ticketmaster have two separate sects of the Department of Justice investigating them.
At least two. There's other
At least
issues, but we'll
two.
leave those off the table.
It's pretty fascinating to think like again, like if I'm trying to paint the picture here or connect the dots, this certainly didn't help their case. I would imagine it's like now we're knocking on Live Nation's door for this other thing. It's curious. So let's talk about this case for a second. Are you surprised that the antitrust lawsuit, which is different than this executive order, continued with Trump's DOJ, or is continuing, I should
Yes.
say?
Yeah. Yes and no. Trump is not as pro business as, like Trump marches around saying, he's pro business, but then, these tariffs aren't very good for business. There's a lot of decisions that he makes that aren't pro business. And he's kind of, in a lot of ways, anti big tech. And, like, it overly doesn't surprise me. Interestingly,
Mm.
JD Vance, who has a lot of influence in the Trump administration, obviously, had a lot of good things to say about Lena Khan, who was the previous head of the
Yeah,
FTC.
yeah, and she was
So,
brutal by many people's perspective. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, the way I
against
look
big
at it
business
is,
specifically. Yeah.
yeah, you have that political wheel where, up at the top,
Mm-hmm.
you have liberal, conservative, middle of the road. You go down and you get all the way down to the bottom. And I feel like some of these people are meeting at the bottom.
The
And,
horseshoe theory.
like,
Yeah.
they're suddenly aligned again in their radical views, just as some of them are aligned in their middle of the road views. So it doesn't overly surprise me that the investigations continued. I would have to assume that they're going to view it through a different lens. It's completely different people investigating, within the DOJ. So there's going to be, different outcomes. Whether, one outcome was better for them under the last administration versus this administration, I don't think anyone knows. But I do think, the outcomes could change. But, the investigation, I'm not surprised that it continues.
Yeah. So many places in this conversation that I want to go.
Mm.
I think the place that I want to go right now is a conversation that you and I had about like some of the negative backlash that Neva got when there was an Instagram post congratulating Trump, and a lot of the Neva community is it feels very sensitive about the topic. But you said something along the lines of you don't care who's in office, you want to help, you want to solve this for the industry. That's my words of your translation. So
Yeah.
like, why don't you strongman kind of like, what's your take on this? I know that you're Democratic leaning based off of our conversations, but you seem inclined to like want to work with this administration, and why don't we talk about this very kind of
Yeah,
sensitive, juicy topic, which is perfect
yeah.
for a podcast.
No, totally, absolutely. What it comes down to is our country over the last 30 years, and more so more recently, has gotten so polarized. And you cannot agree with your enemy on an issue. And it it's just reached the point where it's stalemates on everything. And like I've had countless friends say, you're gonna go meet with the Trump Justice Department. Why would you do that? They're the bad guys. And at the end of the day, these bad guys are on the right side of this issue. And if they're on the right side of the issue, I don't care that they get a win that is going to help the fans and help my business. At the end of the day, I report back to my clients and my clients report back to the fans. And if we can create a win for those fans, I don't think that many fans are going to care whether a Democrat or a Republican fix
Hmm.
the ticket scalping problem.
Hmm.
So I just think we need to, as a country, just look at this better. I sat at the table at the DOJ with some people that I see eye to eye on a lot of issues with, and some people who, I've despised things that their teams have said. But I kind of took that all off the table when I went in the room and said, we agree on this issue. This isn't the time to debate why you're against things I believe in. This is the
Hmm.
time to
Hmm.
discuss what we do all agree with. And I just think that that's a problem with America as a whole these days, regardless of party. There's this takedown mentality. And, to go to your question about the Neva post, in this politically sensitive time, did Neva make a mistake thanking Trump? Yes. But their intent was, we're happy that something was said by the government that is
Hmm.
going to help venues, that is going to help artists, and is going to help fans. And if I were the leader of that organization, I probably would have said, we are happy about this legislation, rather thanking the
Yeah.
specific people who
Yeah.
passed the legislation. And, that's just the times we're in. And, you need to be cognizant of these things because the nuance of thanking someone versus being thankful is very different. And, like I'll
Yeah.
go a step further and say,
Yeah.
I, a few people have asked me, like, why is Trump on the right side of this issue? Why would he do this? It
That's
doesn't make
that.
any
There
sense
we
to me.
go. That's a fucking important question.
Yeah. And I'll tell you my personal opinion on it.
Yeah.
And whether I'm right or wrong, who knows? Trump is enamored by celebrity. I think
Hmm.
we can all
Hmm.
agree with that, whether you're Democrat or Republican. He loves celebrity. Musicians are celebrity. If he could do something to support celebrities,
Interesting.
it is going to put him in better graces with celebrities. So I view it as,
That's
it's,
a hot take, man. I've never heard that. Wow. I mean, it
yeah.
like piecing that together in the way you just said, it's pretty fascinating. Yeah.
And it tracks. Like
Yeah.
he is an outsider who wants to be accepted by Hollywood, and this is an olive branch to Hollywood. And I'm not saying,
Well, it's an olive branch to parts of Hollywood, and then perhaps not.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's not to everyone, but it's not an fu to anyone in Hollywood. So
Yeah.
it is it is only an olive branch in this scenario. And he's done a lot of things that those people despise, but a lot of people, it's their career. They need to eat. It's just like Apple is in there pushing for what they need. Like, do you think, a guy like Tim Cook, who's, uh, a gay man, is supporting a lot of Trump's policies? I'd be very surprised if he is. But
Yeah. Yeah.
his job is to support the company that he works for and the shareholders. And he's going in there and becoming friends with him to get what is needed for what his job is.
Yeah. And I guess to respect and honor everyone's, sensitivity to the issue, I stayed relatively quiet and just kind of like watched what happened. And I uh I won't say who she is, but I was talking to a partner of ours, a woman who's married to a woman. She's a woman of color. And for many reasons is not politically aligned with the Conservative Party right now. And she was telling me a story of a senator that helped the cause, and she shook the person's hand on stage. And this particular senator had been one of the leading voices against gay marriage, like peeling it back, not
Yeah.
just like, really actively trying to do it. And on one end, she said that's a threat to her identity and her family and many of her structures, and rightfully so, of course it is. But on the other end, the senator helped her, so she put a smile on and she shook her hand, and that was her perspective on how she wins the battle, or how she might maybe loses a battle in that moment, but wins the war. And I thought it was an enlightening take, and it's aligned with what you're saying. And out of fear of like setting up too much straw man, like I do think it's important to, words do matter in this political environment. But a straw man question would be like, what should Neva do over the next 4 years if this is the administration we have to work with, right, to get this stuff done. Genuine question, like, is the alternative perspective like we should just not care about solving these issues over the last 4 years? I don't think anyone
Yeah.
would really argue that.
Yeah.
It's
I don't. Yeah.
and I respect people's pain deeply, and they feel like there's something abnormal about the moment today. Like, it's not just politics is normal where you swallow a pill you don't like. And I don't know, I hope that's actually just not true. And we just need, and every generation just deeply cares about what they care about. Anyway, it's an
No.
unbelievably sensitive
Totally.
topic,
And
but yeah, I'll
I'll
pass it to
say,
you.
just kind of close this portion off. The thing I'll say is, like, there's people who I despise what they stand for, who I've worked with their teams. And, part of my goal is to humanize who we are, humanize their side. And, like, I've looked some of these people in the face and, like, they don't seem like bad people. When I read the quotes of them, when I hear what they say, they are the
Fascinating.
most despicable humans on earth.
Yeah.
But when you get in the room and you talk to some of these people, you're like, well, maybe their motive comes from a good place and they don't understand us. And if we can work together on
Ah,
this issue that we do agree with, maybe we could bring 1% more humanity to these people. It doesn't mean I'm defending their ways, but my goal is to show humanity to people who I despise, to hope that we could see some humanity in return.
yeah, absolutely. And I think if I could interject why don't we go to the other side of that coin? You said one interesting question is, why is Trump on the right side of this, and his administration at this time? And, I had talked offline about why is the inverse also true, that the Democrats in some situations have landed on the wrong side of this. And, you shared if you don't mind kind of speaking about your perspective on that and what you've
Yeah.
seen. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Democrats are realizing some of the mistakes that they made. But, the story is, for 20, 30 years, Ticketmaster was the enemy. These scalpers hired consumer rights groups, which are aligned with Democrats. Democrats, trust the consumer rights groups. So, first of all, a trusted source came in to talk to them. So, they weren't skeptical of them, and they misunderstood a lot of these issues. But what's really interesting is, as we work together on the Save Our Stages Act, a ton of these Democratic politicians got to know all of us from our side of the industry. And they used to turn to their ticketing experts when they had a question about Ticketmaster, and their ticketing experts were the scalpers.
Hmm.
Now they just saved our industry and had built relationships with us. So they're like, hey, what do you think? And they heard a very different answer. And they've reacted to these new answers. And, like, I don't want to name the politician, but a very high profile Democratic senator told a very good friend of mine, point blank, we know who the enemy is on this, but the consumer rights groups have so much influence on us that we can't go
Oh
against them.
my God.
And that it's a nuanced argument, and it's something that is going to take time to change, and that they just can't fight back. So they realize it now, though. They see what happened, and these consumer, what I feel like we need to do as an industry is get with these consumer rights groups and educate those who don't understand what's really going on and shun them from taking money from bad people. And, this is kind of going off on a tangent, but not. In the UK, the scalpers made a big move last year to try to change the laws in Parliament. They held this big anonymous meeting where they let everyone know it's okay to be anonymous, just come to the meeting. They invited a bunch of big name UK lobbyists to the meeting as well. And the lobbyists refused to take on the scalpers as clients. So we need to figure out how to shun these consumer groups in the US so that they won't take the business from these scalpers. Because in the UK, they saw what was going on in the US and they said, no, 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 we don't want any part of this. And it was an unbelievable moment to see the lobbyists refuse their money. But I guess maybe that's the difference between the UK and the US too.
Yeah. Interesting. Um, to try and bring this, I mean, it's an unbelievably complex web that's going on here, between, we've already laid it out, so I won't relay it out.
Yeah.
But let's try and tie a bow on it if it's humanly possible. So breaking out all these issues individually, are you optimistic that the government can do something to make this better? And what is it? And let's just stick to the scalping. Yeah.
Yeah. So on the scalping side of things, we have 30 plus states looking at 60 something different bills right now that the Fix the Ticks Coalition is tracking. The vast majority of them are good bills. We have this moment coming off of last year with the Taylor Swift debacle, and it is still front and center, and people are hungry for wins. So I've never been more confident, but I will say that if we don't get through it and, these congressional sessions this year, and, these scalpers are able to run the clock and not have these things voted on, I'm not so optimistic that this fight continues for years to come. I think, we either see changes this year or we're waiting until the next Pearl Jam moment, the next string cheese incident moment, whatever the next big, ticketing, flash is. And, I hope that we could see some change. But, this bill in the Congress, on the federal level is a step in the right direction. And, the fact that Trump signed an executive order on a Monday, and myself and a handful of other people were called into the DOJ to meet with them on Friday, that tells me they're taking this seriously. And all we can do is continue to raise our voice. And I think people should join organizations like NITO if you're an agent or a manager, or NEVA if you're a venue, and share the problems that you're facing with these organizations and help to get your voice extended into these rooms. I mean, that's what I did. I was the biggest, loudest mouth in NITO about scalping, and I learned the most about it. So when the DOJ called, it was like, Randy is the guy to send to the room. So anyone who's passionate about these things and learning about them, they need to join these organizations, have their voice heard and used, and we can make a difference if we actually use what we're learning and band together.
Love it. What is if the perfect solution occurs, what does the fan buying experience look like? If you could just, yeah, if the perfect thing plays out, does scalping go away completely? Is it more so? Is it limited to like ethical transfer? Like what are we trying to attain here?
Yeah, I think the perfect solution involves eliminating bots, just making that illegal for anyone to use any tool that allows you to get a ticket faster than anyone else. A cap on the price of tickets that you can resell them for, be that 20%, 25%,
Mm.
some reasonable number. On this most recent Taylor Swift tour, on the tickets that she did drops of, the week of the show where, they had a few last tickets that they were dropping, the scalpers mastered picking up those tickets and were selling them at a 70x return. We should
Oh
just
shit.
That should not be an issue. Like, even if it's that the scalpers can only sell tickets for double. I don't know what the number is. I don't care. That's for smarter people than me to
Yeah.
negotiate. But let's have a limit on how much people can resell tickets for. We
Yeah.
should allow fans to be able to, return, sell a ticket if they can't go to a show, to, send it to a friend. All these things should be done. Like it shouldn't impede the fans' ability to take the risk to buy a ticket, but it shouldn't allow a carpetbagger to come in and take more money out of the gross than the artist or the promoter makes.
It's really fascinating just to put my perspective on as like from the scalper's perspective. And let's not even talk about, the giant private equity backed companies, but if I'm just a random guy, I might be versed in the art of, predicting when a show is going to sell out, right? And I'm going to buy for Taylor Swift ticket Swift. It's like financial trading, like I'm going to buy 4 of these tickets up front, and I'm going to be able to make a return on it in the future. It's a philosophic curiosity as to why that's inherently wrong, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, it can be argued that it's not wrong. There's no, like ethically, I would say ethically it's
In,
wrong. You go back to the
well,
Bible even, and I'm not a
yeah.
Bible guy, but like,
You
there's,
can't like
they
make
talk
an
about the
interest
money
on your friend or
changers.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. There's all these things like that. So going back to the Bible times, people manipulating things to make more money nobody's ever liked.
Well, Randy, I think I answered my own question. I think on a like if Matt or Randy did that, I don't have a guilty conscience here or anything like
Mhm.
that. Like, oh, I got a side hustle. Um, but if you or I did it at an individual case basis and I have a little side thing or whatever, like, that's not the issue. The issue is that there's these bots grabbing, like artificially creating that demand. And this just becomes the standard and it's just gotten so out of control. So it's one of these situations like where, how do you not swing the pendulum so hard that you kind of, disrupt the whole darn thing? And yeah,
Yeah, and
anyway,
that's what's
yeah.
important. It's important to not go too far because one of the interesting things, using Taylor Swift as the example again, a significant amount of the tickets on the secondary market were parents who were just like, "Holy shit, I could do, a
Yeah.
vacation for a week in Europe with our
Yeah.
family and sell these tickets."
Sorry, girls. They're not
Yeah,
going to.
yeah, and that happened a lot. I've gotten to talk to a lot of scalpers, kind of what I said before with politics. If you talk to people you don't like and don't believe in, you can learn a lot from them, and I've done the same thing with a lot of
Mm.
scalpers. And I've gotten to understand from them what went on during Taylor Swift, and they'll tell you, like, bots won on this one, fans won on this one. I
Wow.
I believe them. There's no reason why they're gonna lie in those scenarios on which ones were which. And they pointed out that a lot of parents on Taylor Swift were the resellers, and like I've heard it and seen it myself. So is that wrong? If there's 10 million people that want to go to a show that there's 2 million tickets for, and you want to take your family to Disney World instead of Taylor Swift, and that's what the value is today, like, might be morally wrong, but even that's questionable. But using nefarious tactics to do it is absolutely wrong every time.
Yeah.
And, like I have a recording of a scalper who was just like the most offensive shit. But I had a conversation with him on Twitter Spaces. And like he just said some really derogatory things towards Taylor Swift and then said, but I love her. I have all the nice things in my life because of Taylor Swift, One Direction, and whatever the third act that he named. And he was like, if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have everything I have today. So
Oh my
that's where
God.
it's a problem. And, these people who've made tens of millions of dollars or these, private equity owned businesses making billions of dollars a year, that's where the problem is.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to attempt to make a point that's like almost too complex to make, even as I'm thinking about this. But if okay, so if you take away the the security trading element of buying tickets and someone's prediction and someone or an algorithm's prediction ability to say, hey, you can buy low and sell high on this show. what that does is just cycle the money back to the promoter, to the venue, to the artist to price the show accordingly. And, maybe, what happens is like, oh my God, like we massively underpriced this show and we found that out. Well, then they would just be forced to kind of like, okay, well, let's go do another show and then we can, increase the ticket price the way that we think it might. And then it goes into this kind of question also about, ethics and who does who is the industry for? Because with the Taylor Swift tickets, you had to be able to afford them. And, where does affordability come into the conversation? In a cap. And then you throw then you throw that into the fact that we're in a society that is a capitalist society. And, and these folks are free to charge whatever price kind of makes sense in terms of the demand. And it's a wild vat when you get it to the top. Now, granted, that level of kind of mismatched pricing and expectations perhaps only happened at the Taylor Swift level. It happens below Taylor Swift, but let's keep in mind Taylor Swift, no one could have predicted how unbelievable, how much fire that tour caught. But yeah, it's a curious question, and to summarize it again, yeah, if the scalpers are not speculating, then the concert promoter and the artists themselves are just kind of back in this place around saying, all right, like what's our decision of how much money we want to make off this? How much could we make? But how much do we want to make, considering we want to keep affordability in mind? And then ultimately returns the power back to the promoter and the artist. So anyway,
Yeah. And
attempted
there's a
to
bigger problem.
go ahead.
I want to touch on this because this speaks to your clients of your company completely, and the people in the middle, and these 1,000 cap clubs that have 5-6 shows a week. They work on tight margins. They're not making, us as the artists, we think you're ripping us off on every show. You're ripping my artist off, but on the other shows, you're an honest business. It's like that kind of nonsense. But at the end of the day, if you have a 10% drop every night because of scalpers, that's 10% of bar that you're not making. It's 10% of merch that the band's not making. If you have, food as well, that's
Right.
10% less that you're making of that. And a lot of these businesses, you're talking about 10, 15% margins. And these scalpers buy, 200 tickets to, it happens all the time. I see like 400 tickets get picked up in a quick little whim by the scalpers on 1,000 cap club show. So those tickets, if they sell 100 of them at a massive profit, they've made their money. They don't care if they drop the price. They don't care if those tickets sell. But for you as the club owner, if those people don't come through the door on that sold out show, you may still lose money. And that's a huge problem. And that's where we really need to be cognizant of the scalpers. We could talk about the outliers of Taylor Swift. That's interesting. That's what really catches everyone's
Right.
attention. But
Right.
when I'm sitting down with the DOJ, Tom DeGeorge from the Crowbars story to the Attorney General, I think is way more valuable, where he says, he sees 10% of every show is sitting on StubHub and never enters the venue on sold out shows, and he can't afford to keep his doors open because of it. That's a fucking problem. And that's not, somebody taking a couple of dollars out of rich Taylor Swift's pocket. That's an institution in a community that has allowed the next superstars to break. Using Tom as an example again, I was talking to him about Doechii. Was a local rapper that played all the open mic nights in his club. Actually, she didn't. She used to hang out at them. He said she hung out and didn't play them because she was afraid. It was almost like a 8 Mile kind of story. But like, she hung out in his club that helped her to develop her talent to where she is a massive superstar now. And, that's the damage that's done. Taylor Swift making $10 million less across, a couple of shows doesn't matter. But 10 Tom DeGeorges going out of business make a major difference on our entire community. And that's where the scalpers hurt us the most.
Yeah. Interesting. Man, speaking of talking shit on LinkedIn, I threw out an idea the other day. Like, okay, we can sit around and we can wait for the government to try and regulate this. I shouldn't say wait for it. We can push the government to really. It's an earnest effort. It matters, but like, what could we do without the government? Now, strongman whether this would work or not work. Couldn't every primary ticketing company come out with a ID required ticket, feature where you buy a ticket and you have to have an ID, a government facilitated ID to enter the show, and then they monitor transfer as well, and then they set that 20% price themselves. Like couldn't this be a selling point for an Eventbrite or a Dice or a Prekindle or any of
Yeah.
these folks to say like, hey, like if the artist or the promoter says they want a show, we can kill scalping on the show just by requiring a government ID.
Well, here's the yes and no. So I had 2 calls yesterday alone with 2 different companies that are involved in ticketing and real IDs. One being a company called Verify with a B, and another one called Tickspace. And they both have ID-based ticketing tools. One that can license to other ticketing companies, one is
Interesting.
a ticketing company themselves. And I started going through with them. I said, what happens if people do identity sharing? What's to say, right now you could buy and sell Ticketmaster accounts. What's to say that, Matt the scalper can't pay me $10 to use my ID to buy a ticket? And they did have some technological solutions for
Yeah.
that. So I do believe identification per ticket would be a great solution.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's legally allowed based on the laws that have been written today that are so protective of scalpers. I don't know that it's allowed. But
No
you need
kidding.
an ID. Yeah, you need an ID to buy a flight. Actually, I should say you need an ID for fly. You need an ID to get on the flight,
That's
and you
exactly
need
right. Yeah.
yeah,
And there's no scalping in flights. Like that's solved, completely.
exactly. I mean, I love the concept. It's why, like I said, yesterday I was on the phone with 2 different companies working on that technology because I do believe that that's the future. But the problem is the law. There are so many laws to protect these scalpers. At the end of the
Interesting.
day, you know,
Interesting.
I said something directly to Assistant Attorney General Slater, where I said, I wanted to strangle Kid Rock when he was in the White House on one specific thing he said. He said, I'm a Republican, but in this situation, I am pro regulation. And before I could finish my sentence, she said exactly what you want the DOJ to understand in this. She said, you're right. It's a free market and you should be able to control your product and your market. And that is truly a free market. Regulation coming in and telling us how to buy and sell our product is regulation and the opposite of a free market. So it's just super interesting at the end of the day. Like, what we need is a free market and we need to have control over our own product.
Interesting. Yeah. And when you say we, who do you, because then you could just bounce back and say, well, the consumer has control over their pocket, so therefore you should let scalping happen. When you say we, who do you mean? The artist?
Yeah, I mean the people who invest in live events
Yeah. See,
should
I
have
agree
the
with you. I
decision.
agree with you.
Yeah,
That's how they move the goalposts, right?
no, but that's how the scalpers move the goalposts for
Yeah.
sure. But the people who are investing in producing great live events should have the ability to decide whether tickets can be resold,
Yeah.
how many times they can be transferred. There's the real solution too of, like if you can't go to the show, you can transfer the ticket to your friend once. Maybe you could transfer the ticket twice.
Sure.
And in those edge cases, where the third person, one out of every 500 million times that, you need to get to the fourth person and you only allow 3 transfers. In that scenario, let there be a solution where somebody could decide whether you're allowed to make the transfer. Like there are ways to protect the fans in all this, and there needs to be ways. The fan could never become victim to any of this. It's just a matter of blocking the bad actors.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a fascinating question of incentives. And I think a lot of the ticketing companies aren't perhaps incentivized to solve this because even though it muddies the waters deeply, there's income that comes from the secondary that is hard to look past. So that's like, I guess one thing that we didn't bring up, like why don't the ticketing companies just solve it? Well, could you expect them to solve it if they're making a bunch of money off this? You know?
Yeah, no, and I mean it's a very, very fair question is what more can the ticketing companies do? So I think we all know there's more they could do. They're creating tools to allow these scalpers to stay
Right.
in business. For
Right.
instance,
Because
Ticketmaster has a
there's money there. There's money in it. Or say if you can't beat them, join them. And it's a very curious because again we live in America. Like it's a capitalist society. Like it's frustrating the level of incentive. Then I guess you go back to full circle and you can say okay, like that you can't expect the ticketing companies to do it on their own free will because it's there's too much incentive to not. So therefore if there's regulation that gets passed, then okay, then they have to do it.
Yeah, but if
Anyway,
you look at Ticketmaster, and I don't want to sound like a Ticketmaster shill because I'll tell you a bunch of bad stuff too on this
yeah,
topic. But, ultimately, they were legally required to allow transfer of their tickets. They had to create technology to allow
wow,
their tickets to be transferred
wow,
to other platforms. So, like if you buy a ticket on StubHub,
hmm
there has to be a way to verify the ticket on Ticketmaster and transfer it to another person. So if you're a company and you have to build that tech,
yeah,
how do you not then build the tech to allow that to happen on your own platform? If nothing else, to
yeah,
learn how the business works with the hope that eventually resale only happens on your own platform. Like my feeling is that we should get rid of the scalpers and Access should have their own resale platform. Pre-Kindle should have their own
hmm
resale platform. Ticketmaster should have their own resale platform. And the market could operate very fairly like that rather than these, multi-billion dollar marketplace companies. And there's a lot of them. I was about to say before, Ticketmaster has a tool called Trade Desk. And Trade Desk allows you to distribute your ticket as a scalper to every single secondary
yep,
marketplace.
yep,
But, the thing to point out though is StubHub has their tool. Victory Live, which is one of these private equity backed companies, has theirs. Ticket Network has theirs. There's at least a dozen that I know of these other platforms. So is Ticketmaster doing a disservice to their shareholders if they don't offer it? And
right,
that's again
right.
something for smarter people than me to decide. But it's just like, I think the answer is that anyone who has a platform that the nefarious actors are the core customer, they don't deserve to be in business.
This is perhaps, let me go a different direction here. We're wrapping up here. So maybe throw a couple fastballs out. Even though you laid out that the Live Nation Ticketmaster allegation of a monopoly is a separate case, and yeah, on the surface or even with a deep analysis, it's a very different situation. It satisfies the lizard brain, if I will, to
Mm.
assume that that would be a major domino effect in creating positive change. That's one perspective you could take, being political with my words here.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so even though they're separate, could you strongman the case that that is actually an important thing for the industry? And outside of strongmanning it, like, what's your perspective? Do you want to see that happen? Do you think? Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Why don't we start with
Yeah.
strongmanning it? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what I see happening is if, let's say, they just split Live Nation and Ticketmaster, I'll tell you the next thing that happens is Live Nation and Ticketmaster do a 5-year ticketing agreement that Live Nation is promised a fuckload of money from Ticketmaster in exchange for their access to tickets. Then Live Nation is spending the next 5 years to figure out, are they building their own ticketing company? Are they doing a partnership with another company? Are they going to go back to what they did before they merged with Ticketmaster and partner with, like, say, CTS Eventim and try to resurrect their failed partnership that they had last time? And we haven't fixed anything. Like, I've been around in this business long enough to remember hating Ticketmaster as an independent company and not hating Ticketmaster as a partner with a concert promoter.
Wow.
So I don't see how splitting them up solves that specific issue. But now let's say that they split Ticketmaster up into 5 companies like they did with the phone company in the 1980s, I think it was. Then, that's way more interesting. But I think that's pretty far-fetched to imagine that they're going to split up Live Nation and Ticketmaster and then split up Live Nation and Ticketmaster a second time, to,
Hmm.
make even
Hmm.
more companies. So, on the surface, my feeling is splitting up these two companies does absolutely nothing
Mm.
in the short term to do a damn thing. 5 to 10 years from now, it could have an influence on the market. But again, everything in ticketing is currently about these exclusive ticketing contracts. So
Right,
they would
right.
need to do something to end exclusivity at some point also.
Yeah,
And, I will say that a lot of venues don't want to end exclusivity because part of those exclusive contracts are huge advances that they use for either capital improvements to their venues or just
right,
operational income.
right. Yeah, I've spent a lot of time talking about the psychology of the exclusive deals and um what what those if you were to look at them as a loan, what the interest rate ends up being is absolutely absurd.
Yeah, and I mean, you
But
could see,
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead. Yeah,
you could see a completely new financial model
yeah,
where companies present loans to venues against their ticketing fees rather than
yeah.
ticketing companies
Right,
presenting those loans because
right.
they do need those loans and there is guaranteed funds. So
And
perhaps that is the answer.
and
And
there's a company that's have you heard about this? There's a company that's attempting to do this.
is that, oh, I think I saw him at, I'm forgetting his name.
Boris
Um,
from Sea Tickets.
yes, Boris, exactly. Boris
Yeah, so he
Paxaroff or
started a
whatever. Yeah.
company that's an independent, kind of model and yeah, I think breaking up yeah, having these incentives tied together is probably where you start getting in trouble. And an independent company to provide the loan off of the fees is probably better than the ticketing company doing it itself. That's another 3-hour podcast, but it is a fascinating concept because we see it with Prism where not even Prism, like, for a venue to write a $10,000 check or for, whatever, it's a huge deal, right? But a ticketing company comes in and says, "Okay, we'll give you 100,000 up front, but we're going to take $4 of every ticket, and we're going to make about $1 million off of that in the next 3 years." And they're like, "All right, you know."
Yeah.
It's like, and it goes back to this ticket fee conversation, and the world generally seeing ticket price being hugely elastic and this horn of plenty that the scalpers can participate in, that we can just throw fees to the consumer and it's all good. But I don't know. I have a more simple view on it that, like, let's go back to the basics. If you're consumer, if I'm running a venue and the consumer swipes $35 with their credit card or $90 or whatever, if 20 of that is the fee, well, that's my revenue, and there's an expense to the fee, whether it's going to a scalper or whoever. But it's going to take. I mean, it's a very different way than the industry thinks about things right now after 30 years of of antics bringing us to here. So it's part of me is kind of cautious to get optimistic that there's going to be real change, but to hear you seem quite optimistic, and I'm grateful to hear your perspective on that.
I'm somewhat optimistic.
Yeah,
I'll close with saying this. Live Nation was built by buying monopolies from individual markets. Buying Bill Graham Presents, buying Delsner Slater
yeah.
Presents. All these companies were the monopoly in their market. And the business model for almost 50 years in the music industry has been monopoly in individual market. And all they did is roll up the monopolies. The entire structure of our industry needs to change in order to see major change. And I'm not optimistic that we see the entire structure of our industry change. And that is how shows are bought and sold
Yeah.
and how artists are compensated and how fees are factored into it. All of those things need to change. And, I wouldn't hold my breath on that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort and but anyway, thank you for doing what you're doing. I know you're chipping away at that massive problem.
Thanks. I'm enjoying doing it. And anyone who wants to join the fight, come join NITO, NEVA, or any of our other organizations that are doing this fight.
Well, it's been an incredible conversation. I'm going to have to re-listen to it myself to like all the things that I learned about this complex web. I mean, the more that I learn about it, frankly, the more that I feel like it's just the onion kind of peels back and peels back and peels back, peels back and peels back.
We didn't even dig in that deep, which is frightening.
It's fractals all the way down for sure.
Yeah.
Well, good combo, man. Keep up the good work. I think you're doing the Lord's work over there.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Cool. So just a little quick pod add-on. It's been about a month since Randy and I first talked, and I was about to launch this and figured let's make sure everything is up to date. So yeah, Randy, what's happened in the last month and a half since the executive order came down? I mean, on my side as a ticket buyer, all these ticketing websites are doing upfront pricing. I mean, at least the ones that I've seen, that's for sure changed. But anyway, let me pass it to you. Like, what's different? What's not different? What's the news? And or maybe there's no news is the news. Yeah.
Yeah, so starting with the fees that you mentioned, that was something from the prior presidential administration. It was one of Biden's big things that he was passionate about was, killing junk fees. And as we all know, politicians say one thing and reality is very different. So he didn't really kill the junk fees. We now see what the junk fees are. And that is the big change that you see. And, there's all in ticketing now, and you can see what all the fees are. And not a bad thing, not upset about it, but it doesn't save any money for the consumer. It doesn't change how money flows from ticketing companies, artists, or promoters, or impact the fans other than they could see what the numbers are now. So kind of very unexciting, but it is a change. But just know that the good news of that is that change is, over a year old that was just finally implemented. So
Yeah.
things move really slowly in Washington, D.C. and in state legislatures. So I think we will start seeing more change, but it's just going to take a while. One big win that we had since we last spoke is the state of Maine last week passed a bill that bans speculative ticketing,
I saw that.
caps resale ticket fees. It will supposedly cap the price that scalpers can sell tickets for. All the press is saying that it does it now, but if you read the bill, it doesn't actually say that. But apparently, there's something in how laws work. Each state has very strange ways that laws are finalized. And from what I've read, when the law is finalized, it will ban markup of tickets above 10%, although it doesn't today, but the bill hasn't been enacted into law, even though the governor signed it. So it's this weird limbo period there. Other than that, on the federal level, the Tickets Act is still sitting in Congress or on the Senate side of Congress. And as I'm sure people will probably know if they're listening to this in the next few days, all Congress has been working on is Trump's big, beautiful bill. Love it or hate it, it's all they're working on. So everything's kind of sidelined. We expect that they may look at the Ticket Act in the Senate sometime after September. We'll see what happens there, but we don't love that bill, as I think we talked about when we spoke last time. But the big step in the right direction with some more disclosures, a few additional protections, but we'd like more protections. And the only other interesting thing is in New York State, we thought we were going to get a new law here that changed a lot of the really shitty ticket scalping laws in New York. New York's one of these few states that has laws that very strongly protect the scalpers. Some of their favorite laws in the country when they're doing lobbying, they always talk about, we need to model after New York. And we were really close to changing the laws significantly in New York. But at the 18th hour, they held the bill and are going to work on it again in next session in 2026. So it's not totally dead, but it's not being dealt with again for a chunk of time.
Interesting. My there's so much to talk about. My head is going back to kind of doing a little bit more of a deep dive on what has actually happened, because it's what could happen is like you made it like what could happen, what people say are going to happen. and then you put the U.S. government in the equation. It's like, okay, who knows, right? But
Exactly.
the thing that has actually happened is this ticketing update, and I hear your point that like let's double click on this philosophically for a second. And I had I was watching this to see if a domino tips over, and I think the first domino tipping over is nothing, but I'm wondering if it leads to a mosaic of dominoes tipping over. And like, let me get your perspective on this for a second. And I think trying to connect a lot of complex dots here, you have the flow of money and the funding source in the industry. Like at what point is not the source of it, but at what point is a venue getting upfront money from a ticketing company, the ticketing company getting paid back in the fee, and then the promoter essentially having this perspective that, hey, if I have a $25 ticket that goes to $30 at checkout, there's a certain amount of money that I could either put in at checkout later that it doesn't matter. It's free money essentially, that like that's their perception. And they say that their studies, like you can pad a fee by 20% without affecting checkout or something like that. And then, that there's also a side channel in that discussion with the agent too. Like, the agent gets an offer with a $25 ticket, all of a sudden it goes on sales and it's $32, it's $34. So I was wondering if the domino that tips over is like affects that whole situation. And now promoters have to advertise a $32 ticket instead of a $25 ticket. And there's no longer this, like arguably that affects the elasticity of the, the elasticity of the market, the elasticity of the market, I should say, affects whether or not people buy tickets. And that puts pressure on promoters to not have as much fees because they don't want to be known from agents to like, okay, my $24 ticket's going to turn into $32. So to me, it could be a domino that affects the ticketing deals and also the agent deals. I mean, are you seeing that happen? Or are people just kind of like, this is the new normal? Like, you might negotiate a $25 ticket from an agent manager perspective with one promoter, it turns into $40. And then the next promoter, it turns into $30. And now that it's not stuffed into checkout, does that change things a bit? Anyway, that was a tornado of words, but please, Randy, pick it up from here.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's a few different answers to this question. And the first piece of the puzzle, though, I'd say is you talk about an advertised ticket price. I almost never see an advertised ticket price anymore.
Yeah.
That seems to be becoming something of the past. You don't really know a ticket price until you click in to buy a ticket at the on sale. I know ticket prices for my artists when I put them on sale, and those are kind of some of the only ticket prices that I really know anymore. And when I click to buy a show, I don't see it in the social media announcement. I don't see it in the social media ad. I only see that price when I go to add to cart. So you have that piece of the puzzle where I don't know that the all in fee is changing that mindset of a fan that much because they're used to sticker shock as they go through the process. Now they're just not going to see sticker shock as they go through. They see sticker shock up front. So I don't know that that changes. But the other aspect that I think you were
Doesn't that kind of debunk the to interrupt real quick? Doesn't that
yeah, go
debunk
please.
doesn't that then debunk the lie that the industry has been telling itself that you can just stuff the fee in, and it's like essentially like, you know what I'm saying? Like the perception all along is like, it's really meaningful. If the customer's going to check out at 32, we're going to have better sales if they start at 25 and then they get to 32, right? That's been the whole kind of selling point of ticketing companies and of promoters, is that it actually does matter what you arrive at versus what you check out on. And there's wiggle room essentially. So shouldn't it affect things to certain, like macroeconomically? Or it
Well,
should either affect things or it should debunk the past view, right? That we could just,
I'm not sure that it does either because you're just starting at a higher price now.
mm,
So you might be, if you're a $75 ticket that pushes up to 110, that person's limit, if it was $100, they may not buy that $100 ticket that was listed at
right,
75 anyway. So
right.
everybody has their limit of what they can and will spend. But I understand what you're saying with that psychology. that, if it was listed as 75 and your limit was 100 and it's only 110 and it's a good seat, so you're going to buy it anyway.
Yeah.
There is that. But bottom line is that's a shitty customer experience.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Oh, no, no. And I know, yeah.
Yeah.
And I know you're on the right side of that, but my feeling is this is really all about making the customer feel better. It's not
Yeah.
fixing any problem. It's not fixing the problem of large fees. And the problem of large fees becomes a lot more interesting because all these venues are getting advances from the ticketing company that are being reimbursed via these fees. And then the fees are passed along to the customer. And these fees are also there because the artists are asking for a larger and larger percentage of the gross, and the promoter slash venue needs to make more money somewhere. So the fan is paying for it anyway, whether they're paying it upfront or in the fee. So my personal feeling is we need to get rid of fees. And that doesn't mean get rid of the revenue that promoters are generating from them because they need them to stay in business.
Yeah.
If an artist was making 85% of the gross, they probably need to make 78% of the gross now and drop the fee or whatever that percentage
Randy,
is.
yeah, that's amazing hearing it come from you as, an artist manager. And I think like we need more voices in the industry to say, hey, you know what? I'd rather take 75 and have an honest deal and have a great customer checkout experience. Like I think I compliment you for that. I wonder if you're like if you my sense is that you're a little rare in your willingness to do that.
Yeah, so I'm absolutely rare in that, but what I will tell you is in speaking to forward-thinking managers and agents, it's a conversation that's starting to become normalized.
Awesome.
I know there was a conversation between some friends at the NIVA conference last week where they were just going to start talking about fees. Doesn't mean they were going to get very far. I haven't talked to anyone who was in the conversation, but I set up to get some people from a high level to discuss kind of what we're talking about right now. And I think it would take years. And then there's also the question of, is it collusion for all the key players in the industry to make this decision that's ultimately good for the consumer? But if all the companies get together and do this,
That's
the
really
laws get
interesting.
the laws get really tricky and bizarre where there could be some antitrust slash collusion concerns if all the key players got together to make it better for the customer.
It's a fascinating point, and I'm not the lawyer. I'm classic podcast caveat. I'm not the lawyer, but here I am going to go and make my opine on this.
Go for it.
I think it'd be one thing if I think the law would get triggered if all of the agents simultaneous or like the whole industry simultaneously was like, we're not going to go below $28 a ticket, and promoters agreed that I'm not going to win. I'm not going to win competitively with my neighbor by lowering the price below this level. If it's a matter of unfucking the deal and colliding to say like, hey, like this is just providing more transparency. I don't think like the whole point is price control. I don't know. Again, maybe I
It
shouldn't have
depends
applied
on
on it in the
how it's
first
rolled.
place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what I'll say is it depends on how it's rolled out because let's say that AEG, Live Nation, and NEVA all get in a room together and say, the
That'd be amazing.
agents.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, already a little ridiculous, but
Is
this is what
a
it would.
bar joke?
Yeah. But yeah, exactly. But this is how a change that's positive gets done is everybody says we're now going to remove fees, but you're going to make a slightly smaller percentage of the gross. I don't know if it could work if just one company did it. Maybe it would work if one company did it and then others followed. But if all the companies decided that together that are on the buy side, which are promoters, and pushed it downward, that would be collusion. So
Yeah.
then if one organization does that, like NEVA, for instance, does that, is that collusion because they represent multiple promoters and venues?
Yeah.
So, and if they did it independently, it would take forever.
Yeah. So essentially, and it's funny. It's kind of like there's ticketing deals that are already in place, and they're going to take time to expire. But I think what you're doing here is pretty radical. You're proposing a solution to this. It's like if if 85% comes down to 75%, the ticketing fee can come down from 20% to 5% or whatever, because there's going to be credit card processing and a legitimate increase. At some
Yeah,
point, there's a cost to the transaction. It's a lot smaller than what the checkout is on
yeah,
Ticketmaster,
but
but I mean, that could be the
ultimately,
start. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but ultimately, the way I view this is the deals need to change in a way where everybody, all the stakeholders are still making what they would have been making. So it's not about getting rid of fees and somebody's making more money. It's just rephrasing how the deal works. And I'll tell you the best part of this, if we as an industry could ever do this, we could eliminate fees on the primary side. The secondary market, StubHubs of the world, if they eliminate fees, they're pretty much out of business. So it's a way to do significant both brand damage and structure of business damage. And what is their complaint going to be when they go complain to the government that we got rid of fees on the primary side?
What is our complaint going to be?
Yeah, I said, what are the scalpers' complaint when we get rid of fees? Because they always complain about everything. I don't know that they could find a valid complaint there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's quite interesting. It's
And
a,
they
such
have,
a
up to, yeah, go on.
No, it's just such a fascinating point about this. Kind of reminds me of like energy efficiency. Like the US is like, well, we could drop everything and get rid of oil and switch to electric, but then, China's a way bigger consumer than us and India as well. So if we do it, but China doesn't do it, then, it kind of reminds me of this whole, yeah. But someone at
Oh,
the same
yeah.
time, someone needs to take the lead and just go for it. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's no easy solutions. I mean, it's funny using your comparison you just gave. I heard Ted Cruz on CNBC a couple of weeks ago, and he is not someone I'm typically a fan of, but he was making a lot of sense where he was talking about AI legislation. And, some people may, dramatically disagree with me and Ted Cruz on this, but his feeling was less regulation on AI. And his reasoning, I actually agree with, which is if we have significant AI regulation in the US, we know China is going to have no
Bingo.
regulation on AI. And do we want to be in a world, and this was Ted Cruz's world, not mine, where China is building AI robots and militarizes them, and we do nothing because we're worried about regulating AI? And it doesn't, it's an extreme. I don't agree with him across the board in this, but the big picture thought process, carries over to the way the ticketing is. These are extreme issues that we need to reframe how we look at the entire issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Super interesting. Well, we will see what happens. I'm glad we did the add-on because it's just minimally, it's a time to reflect and be like, holy shit, that change went down. And, back to my original point, a domino has tipped. The question is it hitting the next domino? Is it going to lead to a mosaic or not? But I think I've had mixed reviews in the industry on whether, this is, this is something that is good and can lead to more, or it's not so meaningful. And I personally would encourage people to feel optimistic right now. I mean, any progress right now is progress, frankly, in a space that has not had progress. And even for you, Randy, to say, hey, there's a willingness for artists to play their part and go down from 85 to 75. So as long as the fee comes down, and it's the same thing, like I hope that conversation does happen at an industry level. And you bring up a fascinating point that how can that happen without collusion. And again, not a lawyer, but my gut says that it's not actually like controlling the price in a negative way for consumers. So I hope you can get a room full of lawyers to have the conversation in a way that's not going to trigger some collusion issue. But anyway, I'm feeling optimistic, and thank you for everything that you're doing and fighting the good fight. And it's a big battle. It's a big war, if you will. But there is progress being made. There's battles being won, especially in Maine. The Maine thing is fascinating. Let's see. I want to see if that inspires other states. I mean, that could be
Yeah.
really
Well,
interesting.
we have Maryland that passed already, and
Maryland,
then
excuse me.
Maine.
Oh,
No,
okay,
well,
okay, yeah.
no, Maryland and Maine. We have
Oh,
both.
okay, okay, yeah,
So you have Maryland and Maine. Minnesota has a better law than they had. New York didn't get completely bowed down. The legislators in New York who used to be pro scalper have changed sides and are against them now. Like, this is going to take years. This isn't going to be fixed overnight, but the tide has turned and the scalping industry is terrified because we have educated ourselves on their tools and their business approach and how they got the government on their side. And we are going to beat them, and they're scared. So just know that it's not going to happen quickly, but people are getting educated, and with education comes changes to laws. So I think if we regroup in 3 years from now, we'll be shocked where we're at.
Interesting. Yeah. I love that. Let's plan on that, by the way. I'll throw you a calendar invite. Yeah.
Perfect.
June 30th, 2028. By the way, it was my birthday yesterday, so we can, that'll be easy to remember.
Yeah, we'll celebrate your birthday then too. And happy birthday.
Hopefully before I turn 40, this will all look completely different.
Exactly.
All right, man. Have a good one. Appreciate you.
Yeah, great talking to you.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.